Hello, good evening and welcome. We're very happy tonight to welcome to our faculty and to the center two distinguished visitors from Japan who are also going to help us advance a goal, a more general goal that I have more broadly, to bridge the gap between domestic politics and international politics, to understand the domestic roots of changes in foreign policy across many contexts, today specifically in the Japanese context. And so first up, we have Professor Machidori Satoshi from Kyoto University, Professor of Political Science there, who's going to talk about domestic politics and Japanese security policy.
Thank you very much. So, I'm Satoshi Machidori and, from Kyoto University, and it's my great honor to have such a great opportunity to make a presentation here in the University Cambridge. And actually, when I was a sophomore student, in Britain expression, the third year undergraduate student, I should say, I came here just as a visitor. And since then, it was my first time to come here. And but my own impression is not so different from that of 30 years ago. It's a very traditional and a very calm and a nice atmosphere. And tonight, I'm really pleased with the fact that only just one night, but I'm a very honorary member of such a great institution. And thank you very much. And I'd like to start my own presentation, the political reform and changes of foreign policy in Japan. And today, I would like to ask the following two questions. The one question is, how has Japanese foreign policy changed because of political reform? The other question is why it has happened. The causal, it's not so, the strict meaning today political scientists uses, but the more general meaning, the causal relationship between institutional changes or change of domestic politics and foreign policy changes. And to understand or to argue this point, I will focus on the fundamental ideas and historical developments of political reform and their effects on foreign policy. I deal with the first topic quite rightly. I'll be back to this topic later. Over time, Japan's foreign policy has gradually become more proactive since the 1990s, as evidenced by the following temporal progression. In the early 1990s, in the time of the Gulf War, the Japanese government did not react to the change of international context since the end of the Cold War. It's a kind of a diplomatic defeat for Japanese government. Since then, the Japanese government gradually or reluctantly changed that foreign policy line in the 1990s, and since the 2000s, the Japanese government took more active initiative in the foreign policy making and in international relations. For example, the latest and most significant example is the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy advocated in 2016 by former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And since then, the Japanese government and the Japanese public intellectuals often focusing on the significance of this idea until today. Alongside these changes of foreign policy, there was a parallel development of extensive political reforms, which extended nearly all the public spheres. When we remind that the Constitution gave the fundamental rules of the public governance, what Japan experience should be seen as a substantial change of the Constitution. So it covers the electoral reform, administrative reform, judicial reform, central bank reform, and devolution. Some other related areas were also affected by these reforms, such as the education and as well as the corporate governance system. However, the extensive reforms ended up mixing the multiple different directions. So for the policy-making process as the central government has greatly changed. It means the concentration of power. So today we often see the strong prime minister's office leadership or strong prime minister leadership in Japanese policy-making process. However, the legislative process as the parliament and local policy-making process has not changed much. And also cross-domain relationship, for example, the center and local and government and central bank relationship has become lacking smoothness. It has one of the reasons that the coordination, we experienced the coordination problems in the COVID-19 crisis in the early 2020s. So about the causal relationship, the many political scientists argue to many things. However, due to the time limitation, I will skip this point today. So just I will talk about my own view. So I believe the two key factors were at play. The one thing is the there were common fundamental ideas, the liberal modernism. It means that make Japanese politics and society more liberal and rational and applicable to other reforms. And other key factor is localization of this idea in each domain. So domain-specific revisions has happened. So as a result, each domain could make its own majority support for each reform. However, it makes a kind of a lack of coordination after the reform. So this is the general picture of my argument. The one fundamental idea is experience as localization, and in some domains, the concentration powers within domain. In other areas, the separation of powers happens. So as a result, the connection between for example, the central government and the local government is not so coordinated today. So hereafter, there are some slides give more detailed analysis of the reforms, the processes in each domain. However, due to the time limitation, I will skip almost all these. The electoral reform was a typical case of power concentration, but I need to skip them. But I need to argue the result of the electoral reform. And there were major features of power concentration as a result of electoral reform. The power concentration within major parties such as Liberal Democratic Party, and other aspect is the inter-party competition is still weak due to the combination of the SMD, small district system, and proportional representation. The proportional representation has an effect to divide the parties into the small groups. However, the single member district system has a very strong effect to make a two-party competition. Now, these two functions competed each other, and as a result, the LDP and some small number of parties are very strong and a very big party, but other small parties are divided into more smaller and smaller pieces today. And also, administrative reform was also a significant one which made a concentration power as a central government, but I need to skip again about the detail of this. Well, these two reforms, I mean, the electoral reform and administrative reform is combined with combined and leads to very strong prime minister leadership. It shows this data. The prime minister can have greater influence on policy-making process today. As a result, before the reform, the prime minister often, meet with rank and file member parliaments. It means the LDP junior members. However, today, prime minister meeting opportunity is offered more often to the core cabinet members and other cabinet members. And the rank and file MPs, the number is impressively downwards. 24% of meeting opportunity to just 15% of meeting opportunity of prime ministers today. So it means that the prime minister doesn't have to see with rank and file MPs in policy-making process. Rather than that, today prime minister makes a policy decision with the limited number of core cabinet members. It shows, this data shows this kind of transformation. On the contrary, the concentration of power, in the central government, the relationship between the central and local governments clearly oriented more separation. But I need to skip again about the detail. Just the final results of these kind of two reforms. Before the reform, the Japanese state has a kind of a coordination. So electoral system and administrative system and local government system and central bank system is interconnected each other, and it's a kind of a coordination. However, it lacks responsiveness to the change of outer environment and inclusiveness. After the reform, electoral system and administrative system has still has a coordination and establish a very concentration of power as a central government. However, local governmental system and central bank system are not coordinated with the central government system. So as a result, partially unintegrated between domains. So, however, this kind of government is more responsive and inclusive, but coordinated. So I go to the effect to the foreign policy. After the reform, the electoral system and the bureaucracy established a new coordination relationship. However, what kind of effect this transformation has is not talked much. So my next theme is what the changes we've discussed so far have brought about in terms of foreign policy. To understand the changes, let's first take a look at the fundamental characteristics of Japanese foreign policy during the 1955 system, the pre-reform system. In the 1955 system, so-called the foreign policy is covered by the so-called Yoshida Doctrine. It's a combination of strong orientation to economic development with small military, and also Yoshida Doctrine has a very strong orientation to be a member of liberal international order during the Cold War, and it has been based on the Constitution and the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. And its interconnection with domestic politics is like that. The leftist party focused on foreign policy, and they often oppose the LDP foreign policy from the viewpoint of the constitutional aspect. And general public has strong anti-war sentiment in those days. However, we enter the 1980s, the emergence of changes made it increasingly difficult to maintain the previous policy trajectory. It means that the new international environment since the 1980s, Japan became a competitor of other developed countries such as the US, Britain, and some other EU countries, then EC countries. And economic frictions, international burden sharing, and end of the Cold War, and the rise of regional powers. It experiences just the early phase of the 1990s. And it means that the end of the Yoshida Doctrine. So the Japanese government has become necessity for more active roles in new international order. And from junior partner of the US to ally member. And voters also expected more realistic opposition parties. So constitution matters, but the Japanese government and Japanese state has to have much more realistic foreign policy after the Cold War. So this new policy direction that expected included the following aspects. So being a responsible and more active player of international regime, and also it includes included the military burden, such as the U.S. peacekeeping operations, and stronger relationship with U.S. policy, including the military operations, in particularly the East Asia. So these kind of policies is covered or supported by more centralized and responsible government, because opposition parties still oppose this kind of new foreign policy line. So in this sense, the concentration of power at the central government due to the political reform has a very nice effect to change or transform the Japanese foreign policy. So in this sense, the political reform has a very good relationship with, or very fine interconnection with the change of foreign policy, which the Japanese voters and international society was expected to have to expected the Japanese government to have. So the central government reforms the power concentration, and the intra-party organization is also centralized, and the competition between major large parties is expected but not realized. And easy to dynamic policy changes due to the power concentration at the central government. And and also the change of the central-local relationship make the prefecture and the local governments have more potential veto player in policy-making process. It means that the local government can deny the direction, the policy direction to the central government in some cases. So this kind of things has quite significant effect on foreign policy making. And today we find the new styles of foreign policy making. It means that the prime minister dominated the foreign policy making, and it becomes clearer since the Koizumi administration in the early 2000s. And its heyday during the second administration since 2012. And other prime ministers often argue that much weaker than Koizumi and the second Abe. However, other prime ministers also dominate in foreign policy making. And some institutional bases are also established. The Defense Department became the ministry. It means it more duty and personnel and often budget. So in this sense, the Japanese government much more energy and money onto the defense since the early 2000s. And establishment of the National Security Council in 2014, and the Prime Minister can have National Security Special Advisor since 2014. These changes are, significant resource for prime ministers to make policy making in foreign affairs. Also, I should point out that the changes of public opinion and journalism as a context of the new style of foreign policy making. The public opinion and journalism are more interested in foreign policy, national security policies, and less absolute anti-war sentiment due to the generational effects. It means the war experienced people have passed away already. So the younger generation who did not have any direct experience of the war, so they do not have anti-war sentiment so strongly compared with older generation. So smaller influences of traditional media such as newspapers, and the newspapers and other traditional media also has taken anti-war sentiment in their own political reporting. And also today we see the effect of the Chinese uprising and Russo-Ukrainian war. So these kind of things are leads to much more stronger support for more tough defense and more coordination, strong coordination and interaction with Japan's own allies such as the U.S. So this kind of things is also kind of the source of the new styles of new foreign policy making. And local politicians as veto players and disturbing factors too, I should say. The sub-governors and mayors still oppose against the self-defense force bases. The most significant case is Okinawa. Okinawa has so many U.S. bases, and Okinawa governors and some mayors in Okinawa has maintained the strong opposition against these bases. It's a kind of a very natural attitude against these bases. However, in the viewpoint of the policy coordination, it has a quite significant negative effect on the Japanese foreign policy making today. So as a last point, I should say what's next. I should say first, will Prime Minister dominance in foreign policy making continued? I guess yes, at least compared with other actors. However, for Prime Minister, the real range of foreign policy choice is limited because international environments and the constitutional limitations still, gave some limitation for Prime Minister. And in any case, domestic factors such as fiscal limitation also matter. The Japanese government has a very big government debt. So in that situation, it's very difficult to have such strong military, for example. And also, local veto players remain active, I guess, in some sense, because the local voters support these politicians. And based on the strong support for local autonomy in general, it means that the Japanese general public gave a very strong support for local autonomy. And it makes the local politicians have veto powers even in foreign policy areas, I think. So this is a kind of finish, I guess. Okay, generally I will sometimes advertise my own book at the last slide, but today I do not do because my own time limitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Professor Takanaka Harukata, who is Professor of Political Science at the Graduate Institute of Policy Studies in Tokyo.
Thank you very much for having us this evening. I would like to thank Professor Hurst for accommodating us. And I also would like to thank John Wright, who has introduced us to Professor Hurst. and the Shike for taking care of preparations. And this is really the second time I visit Stanford. I mean Cambridge. I'm sorry. I was at the last time I visited here was I was I think in about 15 years old. I lived in Paris at the time, and my mother sent me to English language school held at Eton. And they organized a tour to Cambridge, and I came. At the time, I never imagined that I would make a presentation at Cambridge University 30 or 35 years later. So that makes life interesting, I think. Anyways, so let me and I study Japanese politics. I have been doing. I originally started out studying democratization of Japan, but then moved to examine the change in Japanese politics. And nowadays, I have been, as our security policy has drastically changed in recent at least 10 years, and I see the connection between these changes and then changes in our political system. So I began to examine the relationship and the effect of transformation of our political structure on changes in our security policy. So I would like to give you a presentation on my research. The result of my recent research. And today I would like to explain why do we see rather quick shift in Japanese security policy, taking FOIP as an example. And FOIP, well, I'm not sure how are you familiar with the FOIP? How many of no? Okay. So it's a strategy launched by our Prime Minister Abe about now it became like 8 years old. This strategy it was launched by Prime Minister Abe in Nairobi in 2016 as a real comprehensive strategy for Japan in coming years. And it is very epoch-making because Japan was very awkward and timid after the end of the World War II to propose something proactive towards the world, especially some vision or strategy which has security elements. But what makes this free and open Indo-Pacific different from past Japanese external security policy is that it is a really comprehensive strategy combined and the geopolitical initiative combining economic policies as well as security policies. And I think this is really the first comprehensive strategy which Japan has ever proposed after the end of the war. So I would like to, so this is, as Professor Machidori has already referred to the changes we have observed in our security policy, but I think this is a further step. Japan took one more step in changing our security policy. So, I do not have to repeat what Machidori Sensei has said, but starting with PK operations, dispatching our land self-defense to Iraq, and so forth. And there's a bunch of literature on, of course, various scholars have noted that something is happening to our security policy. And some scholars have noted the influence of change of our political institutions on security policies until the era of, under the era of Koizumi administration. But now more changes have happened after Koizumi administration, and in particular since the second Abe administration. So today I would like to give you an examination of the relationship between our changes in our political system and changes in our security policy, taking this free and open Indo-Pacific strategy as an example. And the existing literature ascribes argue that FOIP, Japan launched FOIP to respond to changing international environment in Asia, where we observe the rise of China. But I would say what enabled various administrations to advance this strategy is that the changes of our political institutions made our prime ministers possible to execute various policies under this strategy. And so I give you, this is my, so far I have described the objective of my presentation. So then I move on to provide you analytical perspective, and then introduce how Japan came to launch FOIP, and then introduce various policies under FOIP and how they are related to our political institutions, and I finish with the implications. So to understand how our political system, which is really a parliamentary system, very similar to Great Britain, has changed. And so to understand changing our parliamentary system, there's a scholar called Strom who belongs to UC San Diego. He works on various political institutions, and he gives you a perspective on to understand the power dynamics in parliamentary system. And he perceives parliamentary system as a chain of delegations from among different actors. Voters delegate political decisions to MPs. MPs delegate power or policy formulations to Prime Minister. Prime Minister delegate the power to design concrete policies to ministers, and ministers delegate power to formulate details of each policy to bureaucracy. And in this chain of delegations, each principal or each actor wants to make sure the agents who are delegated the power serve his or her interest. But Prime Minister is very selfish. While he wants to be very much free from his principal, from MPs, while he wants to have a firm control over his or her ministers. And so the Japanese, the power dynamics in Japanese parliamentary system really changed after 1994, which Machidori-san has already gone over. We changed our electoral system in 1994. Under the old system before 1994, it was very easy to get elected as independents, right? So those MPs in the ruling party or in the LDP who are unhappy with Prime Minister's policy always could veto Prime Minister's policy. And because Prime Minister could not really threaten them, he could not have discipline over backbenchers of the ruling party. Because in normal parliamentary system, you can threaten the backbenchers by threatening them by suggesting the possibility of withdrawing the whip or withdrawing the endorsement in the next general election. So in most of the time, backbenchers who are not really happy with Prime Minister obey this direction of Prime Ministers. But in the old system, it was so easy to get elected as independents. The LDP politicians or the politicians of the ruling party always could have high expectations to get elected even when they were withdrawn whips. So they could really rather freely make rebels against the Prime Minister. So that means, in other words, backbenchers really had a firm control over prime minister, and prime minister did not have so much, could not exercise so much discretion in formulating policies. And what was troublesome for the prime minister in those days was that LDP had, in LDP, there existed 5 major factions who had strong autonomy, and it was almost a quasi political parties. And so for the prime minister to manage his government very smoothly, it was necessary to court to these autonomous factions by distributing cabinet ministerial portfolios according to the size of each faction. So that prime minister, so LDP was so this makes like understanding Japanese politics a bit hard because although LDP was a single party government, on surface it was really a de facto coalition government consisting from different factions. So the prime minister did not really have a strong grip over ministers from other factions, and so it made it very difficult for prime ministers to coordinate, to have a coordination within his cabinet and come up with coherent policies in his government. And this really changed with the introduction of new electoral system, which is like Britain first past post system, single member constituency, where it has some PR. I mean, it's a combination of first past post system and proportional representative system, but larger seats are elected under a single member district system. So now the prime minister obtained the power of endorsement to threaten backbenchers, so that it became very hard for backbenchers to make rebellion against the prime minister. Prime minister came to have more discretion in formulating policies, and the factions lost autonomy. The factions became less autonomous, and so the prime minister came to have more discretion in making ministerial appointment, and therefore prime minister now can project more firm control over ministers after the reform of 1994. And then we carried out another reform in 2001, in which we strengthened the power of prime minister in the government. Strangely, before the reform, prime minister did not have a formal power to propose concrete policies. Under the old system, it was considered the department ministers leading departments have the power and ought to design concrete policies. And the prime minister should not really be bothered with concrete policies of different ministries. But we changed the system, and we gave the prime minister's power to propose and design concrete policies. So, for example, if prime minister is now interested in, for example, exporting Japanese sake, he can design various measures to increase the export of Japanese sake on his own. Before, it was under the jurisdiction of Minister of Finance. Okay. And to strengthen the power, and also to help to support prime minister's policy formulation, we expanded the power of the cabinet secretariat. It is like a prime minister's office, and also we also created a new office to support prime minister's policy formulation called cabinet office. And we implemented another reform in between 2013 and 2014. We created the National Security Council and National Security Secretariat in the cabinet in the cabinet secretariat to enable Prime Minister to have more effective coordination over security policy, in particular between the Department of Foreign Affairs and Department of Defense. Okay? They were kind of always rivals, and so fighting each other, so the Prime Minister now can have more coordination. And also the Prime Minister obtained more power over the personal policy of the high-ranking officials. So he now can project more power over the appointment of senior-ranking officials, which he did not have before. So now the civil servants really care about what Prime Minister thinks. So they became more obedient and more loyal to Prime Minister. So this is famous, right? Yes, Minister television program I hear. So it is very big. It has become difficult for bureaucrats not to implement policies while he says while they say yes, Minister or yes, Prime Minister. Anyways, so this is just part of evidence, a piece of evidences which support evidence supporting the growth of prime ministerial power in the government. This is a number of public officials working in the Prime Minister's office. Before the reform of 2001, the number of public officials working in the cabinet secretariat was around 700, between 700 and 800. Now it tripled. It is now more than 3,500 people working in the cabinet secretariat. And this is the number of policy units supporting Prime Minister's policy formulation. Before the reform, there are only 10 policy units who supported Prime Minister, meaning the Prime Minister had direct control over only 10 policies. Now it gradually grew, and now under the Abe or Suga, it is between 40 or 50. That means Prime Minister formulates more policies under his direct control. Okay? So this kind of change, I would say, enabled Japanese prime ministers to propose a very comprehensive strategy called FOIP. Okay? And I skipped this, but FOIP is, there are 3 pillars on FOIP. One is promotion values in the Pacific, promotion and establishment of the rule of law, freedom of navigation, and free trade. We never say democracy because there are so many authoritarian regimes in Southeast Asia. So once we start saying democratization, they will move away from this strategy. So we never say democracy. Yes, there was one conference in Oxford on Monday and Tuesday, and some participants asked us why we don't include democracy, but that's a real reason why we don't include democracy. And there are 2 policy objectives. One is economic objective. We try to help Southeast Asian countries and Asian countries develop their infrastructure, and we want to spread free trade agreement. And so the British joined TPP. That is one of our the result of our diplomatic endeavor. And the other is security. It says commitment for peace and stability. And Japan has traditionally attached importance to security cooperation with the United States, but now we are expanding our security cooperation with India and Australia, and of course, UK. And then also, we promote cooperation among coastal guards to strengthen the capabilities of Southeast Asia countries to enforce maritime law. Okay. And so, why do we have to bother about Prime Minister's power? We have to care about Prime Minister power because these, as I was saying, so FOIP consists from economic policies and security policies, and it involves a number of different ministries in the Japanese government. Therefore, Prime Minister, to make a coherent policies, the government and the Prime Minister has to be able to be able to have ministries follow his direction, and the Prime Minister. So and also as I've said, Prime Minister obtained the formal power to propose policy, so he used that formal power to propose policies to propose free and open Indo-Pacific. And then to how to explain how Prime Minister used his enhanced power, let me start with infrastructure development. So there are menus. So we do. The Japanese government do bunch of projects. This is connecting the eastern side and western side of Indochina Peninsula from Vietnam to Myanmar, like building bridges or improving the quality of highways running across Southeast Asian countries. So this is a bridge, and this is road running. The bridge is, I think, the bridge in Myanmar, and the other is a road in Cambodia. And also, we are helping the Indians to construct a rapid bullet train between Mumbai and Ahmedabad, which is where Prime Minister Modi is from. Okay, and to this kind of running this infra project, you really have to have coordination among various ministries, such as Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Land and Transportation, and Ministry of Home and Telecommunications. So the government, the Prime Minister used this, set up a new council called the Strategic Council of Economic Cooperation for Infrastructure in the Cabinet Secretariat. And so this council made a necessary coordination, and also this council found various financial resources within which are available for the Japanese government, because the number of different ministries have a number of different financial resources and budget. Okay. And the other is a free trade agreement, TPP, CPTPP, Japan-EU Economic Partnership, and so forth. And the Prime Minister set up headquarters for measures for TPP. And so he created two divisions in this organization. One is the division for negotiations, and the other is division for domestic coordination. Right? So when you get into trade negotiations, you win some market opening in some products, while we make concessions in some products. And in case of Japan, we try to get concessions in the field of manufactured goods, while we make concessions in the area of agricultural products. And it was before the reform, it was very hard to make a coordinated trade policy for Prime Minister, because agriculture ministries and for those LDP backbenchers who received votes from farmers were always opposed to opening of the agricultural products. So that made it very difficult for the Japanese Prime Minister to pursue coherent trade policy. But with the transformation of Japanese parliamentary system, now Prime Minister can decide we are going to make concessions in agricultural products in return for getting concessions from other countries in some other areas. And so now cooperation between, so now comes to security. The Japanese government now pursues security cooperation with the United States, Australia, and India. And so this is like Malabar joint naval exercise among Japan, United States, India, Australia, which are held annually. And also we do so-called Indo-Pacific deployment. We send our ships to various important strategic ports in East Asia and South Asia. And also we are engaged with so-called capacity building of armed forces of ASEAN countries in non-traditional security areas, such as disaster relief or humanitarian aids, okay? Not to stimulate the Chinese. Okay. So, but to make this kind of coordination, we really need the coordination between Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Defense, and the creation of National Security Council and National Security Secretariat made that kind of coordination much easier. Okay. And lastly, we make cooperation with law enforcement agencies of Southeast Asian countries such as Indonesia and Vietnam, and we offer them training, and we also provide vessels. And this is in Japan. This policy is implemented by a naval agency under which is this is an agency under the Department of Ministry of Trade and Transport. And the Prime Minister made a basic plan on ocean policy in 2018. And it made it clear that Japanese Coast Guard should engage in more cooperation with Southeast Asian countries and India. And since then, this Coastal Guard agency became more eager and more passionate to provide cooperation with Southeast Asian countries. And so now came to the last slide. Bear with me. So I would say the idea of FOIP arose from two factors. One is rise of China, and the other is Prime Minister Abe's very strategic vision. But what enabled Abe administration and later administrations advance this strategy continuously and consistently is the empowered power Prime Minister, who now has capacity to coordinate different policies among different ministries. So I would say that with political institution greatly transformed, I would say Japan likely formulates more proactive external and security policies. So it's many people, especially in the field of international politics, consider, oh, Japan could do this because Prime Minister Abe was a great strategist and a great architect. But I don't think that is necessarily the case. I think the empowerment of the Prime Minister would make Japan continue to formulate more proactive strategic policies in at least in East Asia and South Asia. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. We have a few minutes at least for questions. If anyone has questions either for Professor Takanaka or Professor Machidori, please raise your hand.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentations, and I'm not sure who to ask this question to, but obviously when one person or one office gains more power, and especially also in international relations, they're much more prone to corruption, potentially. Not that I say that there's more corruption, but on the other hand, corruption is the biggest threat, at least arguably, for security as well. So what are the Japanese new policies to avoid corruption or to kind of checks and balances? I've never heard about anything what happens in this way.
We are also heavily familiar with that issue, but
actually, the problem of corruption has been on the very bad aspect of the Japanese politics for years. And when the Japanese government and the Japanese society has begun to tackle with the political reform, the anti-corruption movement or sentiment has a very strong source of these reforms. And however, at the same time, the responsiveness to, the Japanese government should have more responsiveness to the change of the international and socioeconomic environment has also significant resource of the reform. And it's a kind of a competition between two sources. And as a result, the responsiveness has been a stronger source of the political reform. However, at the same time, the party competitiveness, the two-party competition or two-party blocks competition should have a very strong good effect on the political corruption problem in those days. However, as I mentioned in my presentation, the party competition or the political turnover between two major parties has not so often happens in contemporary Japanese politics. It leads to have the LDP more easygoing, attitude against corruption problem. And just today, we, see the corruption problem in just contemporary Japanese politics. It is a kind of a result of such kind of easygoing attitude of the politicians against, in the situation of lacking two major party competition and no political turnover. So I think we need to recover much more, intensive party competition among two major or some major groups, and also have political turnover in the near future. However, in reality, the situation of the Japanese politics is far from having such kind of situation. So, in this sense, the anti-corruption problem has been a significant disturbance for Japanese politics, and it might have a bad effect on the policy making, also the contents of the policies, I think.
Yeah, for corruption, for the interest of time, we could not make presentations on what kind of reforms we implemented in 1994, 30 years ago. But before 30 years ago, before this reform, Japanese politics was really polluted with severe corruption. But we tightened the regulations very seriously. So I think although the Prime Minister's power has enhanced, I think there is much less corruption today because of stricter regulations. I do not deny corruption does not exist. Still it's there, but I think the degree of corruption became much less severe these days, right?
Additional questions? Yes.
Thank you for your talks. It's for both or either of you. Given these new reforms, what kind of political leadership, what style of leadership do you think is best suited to this kind of context? So do you think someone with a strong personality, strong leadership style, more charisma is better for this kind of context? Or alternatively, someone who's more managerial, more restrained would actually do better? Do you have any thoughts on that? If you can maybe just give specific examples from the past, that would also be great. Thank you.
Okay, it's very hard. It's a kind of a really good question, and it's very hard to reply soon. However, I think that in reality or in fact, the strong leadership style such as Koizumi and Abe has a very good results in Japanese politics after the reform. To the contrast, the current Prime Minister Kishida does not like taking such kind of strong style of leadership, and then he tries to have the managerial styles of the intra-party organization or intra-party the governance. However, the Kishida doesn't have a good reputation as a strong leader or a good leader in contemporary Japanese politics. So in this sense, the strong leadership style has much more fit with the institutional requirements of of the contemporary Japanese politics. However, I think the possibility to success of the managerial style is not denied yet. The Kishida has a very tough situation today. However, the Prime Minister Kishida needs to, it's a kind of the clean up what Abe and the next, the Prime Minister Suga did not do well. So it's a kind of a very tough situation for every kind of leadership style, every kind of leader. So in this sense, the Kishida is a kind of a unfortunate, So in any case, the managerial style is not so good, record until today. However, it might be some possibilities to have good leader with managerial styles even in the contemporary Japanese politics, I think.
I think what's important is what kind of policies Prime Minister wants to pursue, regardless of his style. So because we are in a very tough environment in terms of security and also in terms of economy, we have population aging and also the less birth rate and so forth. So I think you really need to have come up with. The Prime Minister. Those politicians who have aspirations to become prime ministers should really prepare policies well before he or she claims that they want to be prime ministers. Yeah, that's my answer.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much for your wonderful lecture. I have a question of the FOIP strategy. It's a brief question. What are the benefits to Japan of FOIP policy? It might be some aspects of there will be national security and economy, prosperity, but it is a bit difficult to find how about the general public in Japan agree to those policies. And so the society means that whole Japanese society.
Well, it's really hard to, assume one voice from Japanese society. But I think what kind of benefits we try to maintain balance of power in East Asia when the China is on the rise. And so I think that's why I call that. The Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs never says this is a security strategy. They say it's a diplomatic efforts, right? But in essence, I think this has a very I think this is a security strategy. Whose ultimate objective is to keep balance of power within East Asia or in the Pacific, bringing India, Australia, and have a close relationship with Japan, and of course with the United States. And the other thing is, balance of power in terms of economy, right? We are doing everything we can to develop India and Southeast Asia, because now I think you must have heard the weaponization of economic policies. And some countries uses their size of the market as the means of economic coercion, right? So if we have a larger market of Indian economy, or if ASEAN grows as more economically, it becomes more harder for the Chinese government to use the size of their market as a means of coercion, right? So that's another aspect of maintaining or recovering a balance of power in economic aspect, right? And so that has a huge benefit for Japan, not only for the Japanese people, but for various people in Asia and in the Pacific. That's my argument. And I think well, if you say Japanese society, I would not say every person in you talk on the streets know this FOIP, but I think this strategy or vision or however you call it, I think has a strong support with diverse segments of Japan. And what is important is that the Japanese government never says this strategy is a strategy against China. Right? Yeah. So, and we don't call it, it's not officially a strategy. I think it's a strategy not to call it a strategy, right?
Just one thing to add. Just one thing should be added to Professor Takenaka replies is that the FOIP kind of policy is a kind of a reaction to the sentiment of Japanese people. I think actually the Japanese people has been expected much to some other East Asian countries such as China and Korea for years. However, it's a kind of a and as a partner of East Asian countries, partnership of the East Asian countries. However, the Korea is not so case. However, the China does not react to such kind of initiative of the Japanese government and Japan, because China has a very, currently China becomes a very, the powerful, very strong power in international relations, and China has traditionally the leader of the East Asian, region. So China recovers its own confident in the regional power today. So in that situation, Japan does not have much from the coordination among East Asian countries. So in that context, Japan and maybe Japanese people, find the status as the Western or the liberal democratic countries, the status of Japan. It takes, that Japan has a very, very long history as the only, country in which the democracy or liberal democratic the values is emphasized or maintained. So this kind of the sentiment of the Western member or liberal democratic member of the international order is has a very strong or long tradition in Japanese society or Japanese sentiment. So this kind of sentiment is I think it's a kind of a significant source of FOIP kind of policy. And so FOIP is, or the Prime Minister Abe's initiative in foreign policy making has been supported by so many Japanese voters for years, I think.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question, if there is any. Yes, you get the very last question.
Thank you for both of your talks. A common theme of your talks is that this foreign policy change can come because the Prime Minister now has more power. So does that mean it is easy for the future Prime Minister to change what FOIP is? So for example, maybe a future Prime Minister says, I don't care about India, I only want to care about Southeast Asia. Would it be easy for the new Prime Minister to do this?
Yeah, if Prime Minister wants, we don't care about India anymore, then some Prime Minister might revise his policies. That's possible, but I don't think that is very likely. I think we are going to attach strong importance to India. Even the future Prime Ministers. But if there are some prime minister who sees some problems with what Prime Minister Modi is doing right now, he might do that. Yeah.
I generally agree with Professor Takenaka. However, at the same time, I should point out that the Japanese foreign policy is not decided by the Japanese, the government will or Japanese prime minister's will. I mean that the international environment or the U.S. policy lines and some other factors also affect the direction and the contents of the Japanese foreign policy. So in this sense, it's very hard for Japanese government to, for example, abandon the India from the FOIP focus or something.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending and for your questions.